Love, I don't know. We got to put that number 3, I guess, right? And then it's tariff.
It is the day after so-called Liberation Day, and countries around the world are reacting.
Canada's Prime Minister says the US is driving itself into a recession with its global trade war.
Tariffs against Canada, tariffs that were first levied on Canada and Mexico, and then on the world.
US-Canada trade tensions enter a boiling point. U.S. officially imposes 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. The U.S. administration has implemented a 25% tariff on a range of imports from Canada. This move is considered a continuation of the protectionist policies that began under Donald Trump's presidency, now intensified under the banner of safeguarding the domestic supply chain. Plan to increase tariffs by 10% abruptly withdrawn. Initially, internal sources revealed that Washington was considering an additional 10% tariff hike, raising concerns among businesses about a potential retaliatory spiral. However, at the last minute, the White House unexpectedly announced that Canada would be exempted from the increase, a decision seen as more strategic than benevolent, as the U.S. seemingly wants to keep negotiation channels open rather than push its neighboring ally into a head-on confrontation. Canada strikes back. A heavy tariff blow aimed at the U.S. auto sector. Canada retaliates with a 25% tariff on American cars. In response to the unilateral action by the U.S., Canada promptly issued a proportional countermeasure, a 25% tariff on certain U.S.-made vehicles. This calculated counterstrike directly targets the American auto industry, a backbone of the U.S. economy with substantial influence in key industrial states. Canadian government affirms commitment to national interests. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne not only defended the decision as necessary, but emphasized that Canada can no longer endure tariff injustices from a neighboring country considered a strategic partner. This statement also reflects a shift in Canada's stance from soft diplomacy to a firmer position in the face of U.S.-imposed pressure. The deeper root, the lingering legacy of Trump-era policy. Seeds of conflict from an America First mindset. Today's clashes between Washington and Ottawa aren't a sudden phenomenon. They stem from the protectionist tax policies that former President Donald Trump staunchly promoted and aggressively enforced, particularly in the steel, aluminum, and automotive sectors. The America First doctrine led to numerous withdrawals from free trade agreements, alongside steep tariffs meant to force partners to restructure supply chains in ways that benefit the U.S., lasting consequences and disruption to regional trade order. Trump's tariff policies didn't just cause temporary friction. They disrupted the long-standing U.S.-Canada trade cooperation built over decades. Although the post-Trump administration has made certain adjustments, this legacy has left behind a model of relations marked by mistrust, making each move from either side more likely to be perceived as hostile rather than collaborative. The rift between the U.S. and Canada makes one thing clear. No alliance is immune without mutual respect. When free trade principles are replaced by short-term political calculations, even North America's oldest partnership becomes fragile. Canada is no longer the silent ally. It is shifting into a proactive role, willing to push back and defend its national interests against U.S. pressure. This signals that the regional trade order is entering a phase of restructuring, where rivalry and confrontation may overshadow the spirit of cooperation that once served as its foundation. Tariff surge puts Canadian auto sector in jeopardy. New tariffs target non-U.S. made vehicles only. In the latest wave of U.S. tariffs, vehicles produced outside the United States, including many assembled in Canada, have become the primary target. In contrast, domestically produced American vehicles are completely exempt, creating a clear and strategic distinction favoring homegrown products. Auto parts to face tariffs starting next month. Part of the supplementary tariff package includes new duties on vehicle components and parts, expected to take effect next month. This is particularly alarming for Canada, whose vast support industry is deeply embedded in cross-border supply chains, where parts often travel back and forth between the two countries multiple times before final assembly. Canada faces direct and severe consequences. Canada's auto industry, long viewed as an extension of America's industrial backbone, is now suffering significant losses. With a 25% import duty, U.S. importers bear higher costs when sourcing vehicles from Canada, costs that will ultimately fall on Canadian manufacturers and even American consumers. The result is that numerous factories, especially in provinces like Ontario, are facing potential production cuts, layoffs, and even closures. Some goods receive temporary exemptions. That said, a few product categories, such as energy, potash, aluminum, and steel, are temporarily spared from high tariffs if they fall within the protection scope of the NAFTA agreement. However, this policy remains subject to change at any time, fueling anxiety among Canadian producers and exporters. Canada is not just defending, it's reshaping the game. Ottawa signals an unexpected move. Beyond mere retaliatory tariffs, the Canadian government has begun hinting at a broader policy overhaul. In recent remarks, Canadian officials have alluded to moves that will surprise the U.S., implying a strategic shift that goes beyond ordinary trade disputes. Restructuring national interests across 5 key sectors, Ottawa has unveiled a competitive strategy against the U.S. in 5 critical sectors vital to national security and global influence. 1. Auto industry. Canada aims for greater supply chain autonomy and increased domestic production. 2. Fighter jets. A shift in defense partnerships considering strategic options beyond the U.S. 3. Missile systems. Boosting defense capabilities and developing independent production. 4. NORAD. Reassessing Canada's role in the North American Defense Alliance, long led by the U.S. 5. Arctic policy. Actively safeguarding national interest in this geopolitically crucial region, where both the U.S. and Russia hold ambitions. This shift reflects a Canada stepping away from a passive orbit, emerging instead as an assertive force reshaping the balance of regional power. Trump-era tariff legacy. Seeds of conflict take root. Tariff threats still echo. Even during Donald Trump's presidency, Canada was frequently targeted by aggressive tariff policies, particularly on aluminum, steel, and major industrial goods. Open threats of imposing duties on all Canadian imports shook the business community and undermined trust between the two allied nations. Cross-border supply chains are breaking down. What worries Canada's auto industry isn't just the tariff rates, but the looming collapse of a deeply integrated production system built alongside the U.S. From Ontario plants to Michigan assembly lines, parts are manufactured, assembled, and refined on both sides of the border. And any disruption can destroy this delicate balance. Under the new policy, Canada may be forced to rebuild its entire supply chain, a process that is not only expensive but could take years to stabilize. The trade war isn't simply about economics or tariffs. It's a test of political ties and trust between two closely bonded nations. While the U.S. views tariffs as tools for short-term advantage, Canada sees them as a catalyst for transformation, using this challenge to redefine its place in both regional and global orders. If the U.S. continues its unilateral approach, the rift between the two nations is no longer a risk. It's a present-day reality. And in an increasingly unstable world, an independent, proactive, and competitive Canada may become a key force reshaping the North American geopolitical landscape. Risk of production. Halt and breakdown of North American auto supply chains. Serious warnings from experts. Numerous experts in economics and industry have raised alarms about potential production halts and major supply chain disruptions between the US and Canada if trade tensions continue to escalate. The auto sector, a symbol of North American cross-border cooperation, is now at risk of having its long-standing operational structure dismantled. The automotive supply chain is not simply about assembling cars in one fixed location, but involves the constant flow of components, technology, and labor between the two nations. A small barrier like a tariff can clog this entire system, causing ripple effects not only economically but also in terms of labor and trust among partners. Domestic production, a short-term way out for Canada. Canadian domestic market too small for self-sustained production. According to many experts, the idea of self-sufficiency in auto production is not a sustainable solution for Canada. With a market that consumes less than 2 million vehicles a year, Canada is considered too small to maintain an independent, cost-effective, and competitive manufacturing line. Automotive industry structure built on a north-south axis. Brian Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, emphasized that Canada's auto sector is not an isolated entity. Instead, it is an essential part of a north-south production system with the US, where vehicle parts can cross the border multiple times before the final car is complete. We can't just shut down the production chain unilaterally to serve only the domestic market. That would raise costs, hurt competitiveness, and go against a structure that has been developed for over half a century, Kingston shared. Canada produces more than it consumes. Heavily reliant on exports to the US, one notable fact is that although Canada's domestic market only absorbs about 1.9 million vehicles per year, it produces nearly that same number. However, the majority of those vehicles aren't sold domestically. They're exported to the US, Canada's largest and most traditional trade partner. This reveals that the survival of Canada's auto manufacturing industry depends almost entirely on access to the US market. Once that access is blocked or burdened with policy restrictions, Canadian manufacturers lose their most vital lifeline. Donald Trump's hardline stance continues to stir the waters. Opposed to importing cars from Canada, former President Donald Trump, who ignited the strong protectionist wave, continues to oppose the import of vehicles from Canada. He publicly expressed a desire for American car factories, especially in Detroit, the symbol of U.S. industry, to remain the main production centers. Controversial remarks add pressure to bilateral ties. In a symbolic and controversial statement, Trump declared, "They make up to 20% of our cars, but I don't see the need. I want production in Detroit, where it should be, the heart of the American auto industry." This comment not only highlights his America First mindset, but also threatens to destabilize the carefully built principles of trade cooperation under agreements like NAFTA and USMCA. It also raises big questions about the future of the interconnected auto industry between the two countries in an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. As global supply chains are tested by tariffs, protectionism, and political shifts, Canada is being forced to make strategic decisions. Self-reliance is admirable, but in a complex industry like automotive, one that demands large markets, advanced technology, and multi-tier collaboration, cutting ties with the U.S. is nearly impossible in the short term. If the U.S. continues to pursue hardline policies and avoids open dialogue, Canada may accelerate efforts to seek new partners, shifting its trade orientation toward Europe or Asia, something once seen as a backup plan. Now, it might be the only viable escape to safeguard national production capacity. Canada resiliently faces Trump's auto tariffs. Steel aluminum tariffs enforced, auto tariffs threatened up to 100%. March 12th marked the official implementation of a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imported from Canada into the U.S., a strong measure from the Trump administration. However, what drew more attention was Trump's threat to impose tariffs as high as 100% on Canadian car imports if no new trade deal is reached. This wasn't just a blow to the auto sector, but also a deeply political warning. Deep-rooted integration in the cross-border production chain. For over 6 decades, thanks to trade agreements like AutoPact, NAFTA, and USMCA, the US and Canada have built a uniquely integrated automotive production chain. Components regularly cross the border multiple times before the finished car rolls off the line. This supply chain is based not just on cost, but also on trust, synchronized technology, and shared labor between the two economies. Build local is charming, not sustainable. Although Canada produces about 2 million cars annually, roughly equal to its domestic demand, most of that output is exported to the US. Experts argue that detaching from the regional supply chain and producing only for the Canadian market is unrealistic. It raises costs, lowers competitiveness, and fails to capitalize on economies of scale. Project Arrow, a symbol of local tech, not a full solution. Project Arrow is an ambitious move by Canada to showcase self-sufficiency in electric vehicles. With roughly 97% of parts sourced from domestic suppliers, this concept EV is made in Windsor, considered the industrial heart of Canada's auto sector. However, the project's goal isn't to compete directly with giants like Tesla, but to prove Canada's capacity for innovation and spark a spirit of self-reliance in the national industry. Canada considers exiting F-35 deal with the US. Reevaluating the F-35 contract over tech and political concerns, Canada is reassessing its multi-billion-dollar deal to purchase 88 F-35 stealth fighters from Lockheed Martin. The concern isn't just about the financial scale, but also about the US holding control over core technology, especially stealth capability, raising questions about Canada's autonomy in air defense. Exploring options with other strategic partners. Amid shifting geopolitical dynamics, Canada is considering alternatives. From Sweden's Saab Gripen and the EU's Eurofighter Typhoon to France's Dassault Rafale. At the same time, Ottawa is examining a possible role in the 6th-generation fighter jet program, GCAP, led by the UK and involving Japan and Italy in a new defense alliance. Risk of losing domestic industrial benefits. Leaving the F-35 program isn't a simple choice, as more than 110 Canadian companies are part of its supply chain. A withdrawal could not only cancel supply contracts, but also cost thousands of jobs and weaken the domestic defense industry. Therefore, any change must carefully weigh national security interests against economic benefits. Canada shifting missile strategy away from the US? $5 billion Long-Range Precision Strike Project Canada is pursuing the Long-Range Precision Strike Project with a total budget of $4.99 billion, aimed at acquiring advanced missile systems including launchers, control software, and munitions. This project is not just about boosting firepower, but also reflects efforts to diversify weapon sourcing beyond the US. HIMARS no longer the only option. Although the US-developed HIMARS has been praised and widely used in Ukraine, Canada is actively exploring alternatives such as Israel's Pulse, a long-range system made in partnership with Germany. South Korea's K-239 Chunmoo, already chosen by countries like Poland, UAE, and Estonia for its flexibility and cost-effectiveness. This move signals that Canada no longer wants total dependency on the US for defense and is crafting a multipolar procurement strategy, one that ensures tactical flexibility and reduces political risk in the future. NORAD at risk, US fears losing Canada's shield. Withdrawing from NORAD. A strategic gap for the US-Canada is reassessing its role in NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, established during the Cold War. While no official decision has been made, the possibility of Canada adjusting its commitment level or withdrawing from some treaty obligations is deeply concerning to Washington. NORAD relies on a radar network stationed at key points across northern Canada to provide early warnings of threats from space and ballistic missiles. If Canada steps back, the entire Arctic, considered the backyard of both countries, could become a blind spot, weakening the ability to detect and intercept early attacks from adversaries like Russia or China. Replacing the radar system could cost billions. General Gregory Guo, one of NORAD's senior commanders, warned that if the U.S. is forced to maintain the surveillance and defense system on its own, costs will skyrocket. This includes deploying additional long-range radar, early warning aircraft squadrons, and even naval patrol fleets in the Arctic, a region with harsh weather and extremely limited accessibility. At its core, U.S.-Canada cooperation in NORAD isn't just about sharing military duties. It's also a strategy for reasonably distributing defense costs between allies. Renegotiating or altering NORAD's structure could indicate that Canada wants to redefine its role, not as a strategic satellite, but as an equal partner with a voice. The Arctic race, Canada challenges the U.S. Trump's mining plan sparks geopolitical Arctic race. When former President Donald Trump publicly supported plans to expand resource extraction in the Arctic, Canada was pushed into a reactive stance. Facing the risk of being overshadowed or pressured in a scramble for resources, Ottawa was compelled to accelerate investment in strategic infrastructure in this highly sensitive geopolitical region. Plans include building deep water ports for heavy cargo ships, energy stations serving both civilians and military, and a telecom system to maintain control and connectivity across the icy stretch from Nunavut to Yukon. Massive geological value and long-term sovereignty ambitions. Canada's Arctic, especially areas like Nunavut and Yukon, is not only of strategic value but also a geological treasure chest for the nation. Estimates suggest the region holds up to 30% of Canada's oil reserves, thousands of mineral deposits, and rare earth metals. As the world shifts to green technologies, these resources grow increasingly vital, not just economically, but as lifelines in global supply chains. Rare political consensus across Canadian parties. Amid mounting pressure, something rare has happened. All three major Canadian political parties, the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, and the New Democratic Party, NDP, are united in their stance to enhance presence and investment in the Arctic. This underscores that territorial sovereignty in Canada's northern frontier is not only a strategic priority, but also a rare common denominator in an often divided political landscape. Building military outposts, modern settlements, and transportation infrastructure in the Arctic is no longer just a long-term dream. It's a necessary move for Canada to assert itself in the increasingly competitive Arctic power struggle. Both NORAD and the Arctic represent strategic choices Canada now faces: to continue relying on U.S.-led frameworks, or to gradually build a more independent model of defense, resource management, and influence. In a world where geopolitical lines are being redrawn, with China and Russia rising in the Arctic and climate change opening new shipping routes, Canada can no longer remain on the sidelines. The big question is, can Canada balance its alliance with the U.S. while asserting Arctic sovereignty? Or will it ultimately be forced to choose one path over the other? If not for Trump's punitive tariffs, would Canada have gone this far? The answer may be unclear, but right now, Canada is charting a different path. Thanks for watching until the end. Don't forget to leave a like and share to support us. Goodbye, and see you next time.